In this essay, based on a yahrzeit shir that Rav Soloveichik gave many, many years ago, decades ago, called Hayudi Mashul Sefer Torah, we're up to a section here called Ein Kedusha Lelo Pe'ula. According to the halacha, especially with regard to Shabbos, there's no kedusha that could be chal on a davar shel mamish im ein oseh ha'adam ma'isa hamakadesh es hachefetz. So you need the human act of kiddush, and in that sense, you could say that the Jew and Judaism sana Petishizm, in other words, all these kinds of, shall we say, egotistical philosophies of the physical universe, the Jewish attitude doesn't give any sanctity to something that's like original sanctity. It's not a kedusha, but davar shuli atzmo. It's rather the person who's obligated to generate that kedusha through his pe'ula, to be meichel kedusha on the chayfetz. And if we find different concepts of kedusha in the world of halacha, with regard to makom, with regard to zman, with regard to objects, the realization of those concepts require pe'ulas ha'adam, the human action, the human initiative. For example, kedushas migdash, otherwise known as kedushas mechitos, requires that man, through his pe'ulos, will create a kedusha of mechitos. And there are full halachas that were formulated about how and in what sequence to be mekadesh the city of Yerushalayim, the Azoros. And when a person visits the Migdash in Yerushalayim, or the Migdash for all generations, it's kitchel l'shaita v'kitchel asid lavo. On the other hand, sometimes the halacha will determine that in order to create an eternal kedusha, a person has to limit and restrict that kedusha to a certain period of time. Kitchel l'shaita v'lo kitchel asid lavo. With regard to karban, for example, you talk about the chelav of a karban. When you talk about trumas and maasros, a person has to do something in order to designate and generate kedusha on an object. The kedusha will be chal on objects only through the mechanism and the instrumental pe'ula of a human being. Kedushas peh, hafrashas truma, hafrashas meiser. He has to declare chatos Hashem, ol Hashem. He has to be mafresh maser, truma, chala. It's always going to be with the kriyas shem. So that there's no such thing as automatic kedusha. There's a man-made kedusha. Take, for example, Moed, the holiness of time. To sanctify time, we need Bezdin, and Bezdin are the representatives of Klal Yisrael. And we emphasize this in the chasim of every bracha on Yontif, when we say Baruch Atah Hashem HaKadosh Yisrael Vazman. And the Gemara says in Brachos on Daf Mem Tes, Shekidesh Yisrael Dekitchu L'Zmanim, that Klal Yisrael will be Kadesh L'Zmanim. Again, Shabbos is a different concept. Now, as far as the dates in the calendar for Yetzias Mitzrayim, for Matan Torah, for the Day of Judgment, for Salachti, all these are determined by Bezdin. Bezdin has to do a special action of Kiddush and declare Mekudosh, Mekudosh, Mekudosh. Now, this principle applies to the sanctity of the Sefer Torah. It's quite possible that in the case of Sefer Torah, there's a very significant emphasis on the human pu'ula, the human action, more than other Kedusha. Sefer Torah cannot be endowed with Kedusha simply by virtue of the Ksav, of the osios that are on the cloth. Even if those osios represent the words of God, but nevertheless we need the action of man Pu'ulas ha'adam mikadeshes will sanctify the Sefer Torah, and we'll need ibud lishma, we'll need ksiva lishma. And the Rambam has a shita here that it's not a mechanical action of writing the Sefer Torah, but rather each individual has his own particular signature, so to speak, a ksav yad, that reflects those lines that are typical of his personality, of his emotions, of his dreams and his visions, of his belief and faith, his joy, and perhaps the opposite, his boldness and his despair, his fear. Everything is individual, and that's the Makadesh. Without it, there's no sanctity to the Sefer Torah. When a person pours something into a vessel, or here in the case of the Sefer Torah, the Ksav Yad, which in a sense is his neshama, and he fills the letters of the Sefer Torah with black ink written on a cloth, and that generates Kedusha. The dio, the ink itself, is transformed into a black fire, and the cloth into a white fire. The sides, which are called the gvilin, together with the osios, the letters, are uplifted. And this is through the desire and the longing of the human being. Everything gets, so to speak, heated up by the neshama. And that's a very personal act of kiddush. Even the Shemos HaKadoshim, the holy names of God, will not be elevated to the special level of kedusha if you don't have a man to be makadesh the four osios of the name Hashem. Just to summarize in one sentence everything that we've said tonight, it's impossible to realize kedusha without the initiative of the human being. And now, with regard to the function and the role of the human being in the realization of Kedusha, we have a certain halachic question and difficulty. We said that Kedusha is a result of human activity, of the human pu'ula, the action. And now the question is, how can a man put something into and generate a Kedusha which he doesn't have himself? I can't give you and transfer over to you something that I don't own. And that's the basic principle of Dini Mamonis, Eino Demakti Davar Shelo Paliola. Halacha demands that the chayfetz that I'm trying to transfer over to your ownership, not only should it be mine on a legal level, but it's got to be in my physical domain. It's got to be accessible to me. So that theoretical ownership on a chayfetz is not sufficient. It's not significant. We need the actual ability to use the chayfetz. It's mine and I can use it. For example, if the object was stolen by Gazlan, then in exile, the owner cannot sell it. He can't give it away as a gift. And this is a statement of Rabbi Yochanan Bar Metzia Daf Zayin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Gazal v'lo nitziyashu abaylim shnei meinim yichol lakdisho. Zel lefi sheina shalo v'zel lefi sheina b'shuso. A chayfetz, an object that's yours, but it is now outside your possession, outside your domain. It's in the domain of the Ganov, or the Gazlan. Therefore, it's not only b'shuso. And Eino Yochel Akdisho cannot be Magdish. Another question that comes up from time to time is, how could a person be Makadesh through his Pa'ula, the Beis HaMikdash, the Moadin, a Sefer Torah, Kisvei HaKodesh? These Kedushos are not in his possession. How could he be Makne Kedusha to a Makom or to his man, when it's not his kedusha, he doesn't own it. He doesn't have this in his rishus. This kasha that we're asking is really based on a fundamental mistake, an error. The halacha paskins that the action of a person will generate the sanctity, even in the case of Migdash, and how much more so in cases of Yom Tovim, of Sefer Torah, because the halacha believes that the individual personality was blessed with all these kedushos. Man combines within him all these sanctities. And this is the philosophical outlook of halacha, that there's no kedusha that's external with regard to makom, with regard to zman, with regard to chafotzim. Any external kedusha expresses itself in the original kedusha of the individual personality of the Jew who's Makadesh. And he sent out, so to speak, beams, ideas, intentions of kedusha, whether it be for a Migdash, whether it be for Moadim, whether it be for Sefer Torah. That's Makadesh. The kedusha is really waiting outside to be invited in, ready to give a certain objective form, a solid form, like makom, like zman, like the klaf and the osios. These are all born, they come into existence in the inner chambers of subjective existence, human existence. Whatever you see on the outside has its parallel on the inside. Without its kedusha bifnim, then the kedusha bachutz would be very gray, very stale. The halacha recognizes kedushas Migdash and Yerushalayim, the Harabayis, the Azoros, the Heichal, the Kodesh Kodashim, in an external world. And this proves that halacha is well aware of the fact that kedushas Migdash begins in an inner world. What is the real expression of the concept of kedushas Migdash? It's lifnei Hashem, Gili Shechina, the presence of the Almighty, Baruch Hu, Baruch HaMakom, V'asuli Migdash v'shachanti b'socham. It's the Shechina that's there. Where would the Shechina feel comfortable, so to speak, its presence, resting its abode? At what corner of the entire vast cosmos does Rebbeinu Shalom have more of an interest in finding his makom menucha? It's the neshama of a man. Vayachlom v'nei Hashem nitzav alav. Hatzadikim, says the Medrash, Elohim miskayim alem. Rebbeinu Shalom mislabech b'yishiyus shel Yisrael. And the consciousness of a Jew, his mind, is a mishkan, an abode for Ein Sof, for infinity. Man, as a Makadesh, is also a Migdash. He is subjective Migdash, but it's the temple of God nevertheless. And it has the power, the authority to express something about the pnimius in this world of Maaseh, in this world of the Migdash HaChitzoni. This will be an expression, a reflection of the Migdash HaPnimi. Moshe Rabbeinu, in his last hour on this earth, calls out, Me'ona Elokei Kedem, Umisachas Zroos Olam. Ribon HaOlamim created a ma'on, an abode, on that very mystical day 6, in which man rolled into this world. Achar v'kenem tzartani. The base of Migdash is kadma, just like the man himself. Me'una elokei kedem. The halacha demands from man to build. And the dmus of me'una elokei kedem means to express and manifest the Migdash HaKadmon. And for that, we have to build a Migdash Bachutz, a Migdash of a Mita, of Avonim, an Eitzim, made on a mountain hill, Givas Chol, Shtufos Chamosin, Midvarai, Umukas, Ruchos, Amok Kashero, Beis Migdash, Concrete. Umitachas Ros Olam. On the fundamentals and the foundations of this physical world, we have to build a Migdash which symbolizes the abode of God, of Elokei Kedem, of the true divine being. And the Gemara in Zvachim Adaf Chav Daled vacillates as to who was Makadesh, the Avonim, the Ritzpah of the Azorah. In the Gemara in Zvachim, on Daf Chav Daled, the Gemara vacillates as to who sanctified the place of the Beis HaMikdash. Was it David or Shlomo? And Tosas seems to assume that David sanctified the place, even though Shlomo built the bias, but David actually engendered its Kedusha. And the Pasuk seems to say explicitly that it was actually Shlomo HaMelech who initiated the Kedusha. It says in Divrei Yomim, Bayom Ahu, Kidesh HaMelech Es Tocha Chotzer, Asher Lifnei Beis Hashem. And Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Samach says that Kidesh Lahamid Bo Mizbeach. So we see that Shlomo HaMelech was Mekadesh the Azorah, the courtyard, so that it be Ksher LeMizbeach. But nevertheless, the sugya elsewhere in Zvachim seems to assume, and that's how Tosfos understands it, that David was the one who actually initiated the Kiddush of the Beis HaMikdash. It was not Shlomo. However, I think the answer is that there are two different principles here, fundamental principles in halacha. One is Kiddush HaZorah, and the other is Tavnis HaMikdash. Kiddush HaZorah means that there are Shiori Menachos and Shir, and all this was part of a process that was initiated by Shlomo. The Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBechir Perek Vav says explicitly, Shlomo Kidesh es HaZorah, and that's as far as Kiddush es HaZorah. Then it's another Kiddush, which is called Tavnis HaBinyan Shel Beis HaMikdash, and that was prepared by David Baruch HaKodesh, as the Pasuk says in Divrei Yomim, Vayitein David l'Shlomo b'no es Tavnis ha'ulam es batav v'gin zachav v'alyosav v'chadorav ha'pnimiyim u'beis ha'kaporetz v'tavnis kol asher yeh beruach imo lechatzos beis Hashem l'chol ha'lishkos saviv liotzoros beis Elokeinu beis Elokim lotzos ha'kodesh. So Shmuel So we can say the following in sum. Shlomo Melech took the plans of David and he carried them out. He didn't have the reshus to make a change at all in the Tavnis HaMikdash. But Shlomo was Mekadesh the Beis HaMikdash. But his koach to be Mekadesh the Beis HaMikdash comes from David. So the Gemara asks, did David sanctify the Ritzvah Elyona, the top level of the floor of the Azara? Or did it go all the way down till the Tahom? And he was Mekadesh everything. So even though Shlomo Kiddush, but Shlomo can only be Mekadesh that which was prepared in the Tavnis, the original Tavnis by David. Beyond that, Shlomo could not be Mekadesh. And perhaps this halacha has philosophical implications. Shlomo created the Kedusha of the Mikdash on its outside, the external, what we call the Batei Broi, the stones, the Ritpa, the Lichkos, all the different places in the Beis HaBechira. His involvement, his dedication was to sanctify that which is Tachas Ros Olam. But David, on the other hand, was Makadesh Kedusha of Ma'ona Elokei Kedem. That's the Migdash HaPnimi. That's the Mishkan Hashem, which is really the inner personality of the human being, of the person. Therefore, he was Zocher David to get from Hashem that which was necessary to be Messiah to complete the Tavnis HaBinyan. Who would be more worthy of receiving the Ruach HaKodesh, how the Migdash has to look, if not the great architect who gave a siyua, lahavi lidei gmar, the Ma'on Elokei Kedem. David is the great architect of the Beis HaMikdash HaPnimi, of the inner Beis HaMikdash. Who besides David, who understood the cravings, the desire of man, the longings of man to come close to the Borei Olam, to the Creator. No one like David. Kayal tarog al afike mayim. Who would seek out Ein Sof, like David, Barchi Nafshi es Hashem, who widened and broadened inside his own personality a place where the Creator could find menucha, could rest. David, who cried out with tremendous feeling, Im etein shnas li einai lafapai tnuma ad emtza makom lashem, until I find a place for Hashem. Give me a minute here, see if I can improve this. Now I see that Chaim Roman is here, and I'm going to apologize to him because we're finishing up the shir. You know, we didn't have too much participation, and you want to listen to the last concluding lines. So David is he who cries out that I will not give sleep to my eyes until I find a place for Hashem. Mishkanos Labir Yaakov, who would guide the people of Israel in the presence of the Shechina. It's Ne'im Zmiros Yisrael, Lechu Neranenol Hashem Noril Litzur Yishenu. And Knesset Yisrael becomes the Mishkan for the Borei Olam. David is the one, through Sefer Tehillim, who is going to function in that capacity. He represents the cry, the longing of the Jewish soul, going through an experience that's agonizing of loneliness, in which The Jew is crying out for a friendship, a closeness with the Shekhinah. He's craving, he's praying for it. David is going to bring about the completion of Ma'on Elokei Kedem, as we said. And Shlomo, as we said, cannot go one step beyond what David does. And this is Elokei Kedem, which was prepared from the time of creation, the Sheshis Mei Breishis. And therefore, it would be David HaMelech who would draw the lines and the curvatures and the plans of the Tavnis HaMikdash. And Shlomo would be, it would be incumbent upon Shlomo to follow all the rulings of that great Tavnis that was created by David HaMelech. So really, in truth, the Mikdash on a pneumistic level was created by the great architect David HaMelech, not Shlomo. Mizrach Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. And with Churban Habayis, as tragic as it was, it did not completely annul and nullify the Jewish people, because the Jew who looks behind him and sees the burning Mikdash, he sees the loss of the great structure, the edifice built by Shlomo. He knows that on top of the Mikdash is David, the Ma'on Elokei Kedem, and no Nebuchadnezzar, no Titus, with all his soldiers, could control and dominate that Kedusha of Ma'on Elokei Kedem. And therefore, Asaph sings in the Mizmor on Churban Beis HaMikdash, Mizmor Liasaf, Ki Shafach HaMasal Eitzim V'Alavonim, HaMa'oneh Elokei Kedem, Beis HaMikdash B'netzach Yisrael Nishar La'ad. And this inner concept of the Mikdash, we identify with the personality, the essence of a Jew, is a yesod. It's something fundamental in all of the thoughts and the philosophies of Judaism. The Ramah, for example, who wrote a book called Torah Sa'olah, on the Kabbalah, on the structure of the Beis HaMikdash HaPnimi, he has the same idea. And you'll see it again and again in the writings of Chaim Volozhin, in Nefesh HaChaim. So although the Kedusha, the sanctity of Moadim and Zmanim, depends upon the action of man, only man has the ability to create simcha on a period of time that's empty from meaning. Only man could take something that has no specific sanctity to it and convert it and transform it to sanctity, Kedushas Hazman. And this is the Yontif HaPnimi, the inner concealed essence of a Yontif that comes from the Mamakim, from the depths of the personality of man, of the Jew. The Jew is completely saturated with sanctity, with the Kedusha of Moed. He has it inside of him. All the Kedushas that man generates and creates come from inside man. And on the inner bias, it's all what man created. And it's Kedusha, it's not Chol. The greater the person, the greater is the nature of the Yontif, of the Simcha that's within his Neshama, that could generate a Kedusha Hazman, Kedushas Makom, Kedushas Chefetz, as we discussed at the beginning of our discussion. I want to take this opportunity to say that we're about to enter into a great Moed, the Moed of Kabbalas Torah, and for sure, we have to appreciate these concepts that we discussed tonight. And Yirotzo may it be his will that we take these concepts to heart and we realize the awesome potential and responsibility that rests on our shoulders to follow in the footsteps of David HaMelech, to create a Tavnis HaMishkan, to bring the Shekhinah down from on high, to elevate everything that we have, every object, every experience, every encounter in our lives. And b'li neder, I don't promise, but if you'd like to continue with the Rav's insights on the comparison between the kedusha of a Sefer Torah and that of a person, then b'li neder, if there's interest, then we will continue with that after the Chag. I have to tell you that this has been a little bit difficult for me